Hey, good morning, y'all. Welcome to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Adam Keller, and this is Shop Talk, our Thursday morning episode we're producing every week with a focus on labor education, history, and training. It's Thursday, October 12th, and we're broadcasting live from Spice Radio Studio in the heart of the Tennessee Valley in Huntsville, Alabama. Every episode is live streamed on YouTube and Facebook and is released on your favorite podcasting platform in the coming days. Today on the show, really looking forward to it, we're talking cooperatives, employee ownership, and some cool work going on in Alabama with Kevin Burns. Before we get into that, I want to take a moment to thank our very first sponsor for Shop Talk. At the Valley Labor Report, we are big fans of Labor Notes. Labor Notes is a media and organizing project that since 1979 has been the voice of union activists who want to put the movement back in the labor movement. Through their magazine, website, books, conferences, and workshops, Labor Notes promotes organizing, aggressive strategies to fight concessions, alliances with worker centers, and unions that are run by their members. Labor Notes is also a network of rank-and-file members, local union leaders, and labor activists who know the labor movement is worth fighting for. They encourage connections between workers in different unions, worker centers, communities, industries, and countries to strengthen the movement from the bottom up. With 40 years of movement building behind them, Labor Notes exist as a resource for leaders and union members who want to chart a new course for the labor movement. At the Valley Labor Report, we are proud subscribers and supporters, and we encourage our listeners to do the same. Go to labornotes.org to find out more. And really do appreciate Labor Notes. They have some great events coming up in the next month or two, which I will share with you at the end of the episode. But I do want to note real quick that Lisa from Labor Notes, one of their new organizers, is supposed to come on the show next week. We will be an hour late next week. It'll be at 10:30 Central Time, 10:30 a.m. Central Time. Just to make sure we can accommodate Lisa, but really looking forward to that conversation. Every month we do a Labor Notes themed episode. So for this month, Lisa's going to come on and talk a little bit about her new work with Labor Notes. And then I'm really excited, we're going to talk about 10-minute meetings. The UAWD, Unite All Workers for Democracy, the Reform Caucus within the United Auto Workers, UAW, they have put out some excellent guides and resources on how to have 10-minute meetings as a member, whether you are a leader in your union or just a rank-and-file activist. You can do 10-minute meetings and have a lot of success with that. So looking forward to that training next week. In the meantime, really looking forward to today's episode. We're going to talk about something a little different. As I say every week, the goal of Shop Talk is to be educational. There's some stuff that just selfishly I want to learn. There's stuff that we hear from y'all in the audience about. And then there's stuff that we think would be useful or relevant to the labor movement. Stuff that we think, is really worth sharing among labor activists, labor organizers, and workers who are interested in learning more about the movement. The topics of cooperatives and employee ownership have come up, from time to time these past few years that we've been on the air. And, those are topics that I'm interested in learning more about, particularly how it may be relevant to workers here in the South. I know I did an episode of Shop Talk earlier this year where I mentioned a cooperative town called Powderly, Alabama, that was formed by the Knights of Labor back in the late 19th century. And that really was interesting to me. I've heard folks like Richard Wolff talk about worker co-ops for years. So I've been interested in learning more. And thanks to a mutual connection, I was introduced to Kevin Burns and Daniel Wade Marshall of the Sand Mountain Cooperative Education Center. So with all that out of the way, Kevin, welcome to the Valley Labor Report and Shop Talk.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Going to get you here on the screen. It's always tricky when it's just me by myself here in the studio, but
Oh,
Thanks
nice.
again for joining me. I really do appreciate it. And I wanted just to give you a chance to introduce yourself first off. Tell us a little
Yeah.
bit about your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, great to be here. I'm just coming off of the first employee ownership conference I've been to, which was up in Huntsville the last 2 days, and that was pretty cool. I mean, honestly, a lot of the employee ownership people, they're very business, they're a little stuffy. So it's great to be here on the Valley Labor Report, back to kind of more my roots. I was a teacher in New York City for 6 years, and I was the chapter leader at my school. So my background's more education and labor, but yeah, I mean, it's really cool to talk to some of the folks at these employee-owned companies because, I'm talking to truck drivers who are set to retire with, $1 million, $2 million in their ESOP account, in their retirement plan, as a result of employee ownership, talking to guys who make tractor parts who are retiring with $6 million in their ESOP account, as a result of employee ownership. So a little more about myself and how I got into this. Like I said, I was a teacher for 6 years in New York City. I taught seventh grade social studies in the
Nice.
Bronx.
Former social
Shout
studies
out
teacher here. So, yeah.
yeah, exactly. Shout out to Burnside Ave, um, in the Bronx. Yeah, and basically, how I got involved in employee ownership and specifically in Alabama was, I met a friend of mine, Daniel, at our teacher training program in New York, and another one of our friends, Bendary, and we decided to come down to Alabama. His family's from Birmingham, and he wanted to. His grandfather, who had been a fire chief in Birmingham, had just passed, and he wanted to show us Alabama. So we went down, went to Gulf Shore, went to Birmingham, and then he said that his grandfather had this property in Pickens County. He wanted to show us. It was a tree farm, which he called I think he called it like the money hole farm because it only lost money. But he brought us out there and basically revealed, all of us were coming from organizing backgrounds in college, and he was like, I want to do something good with this property. My grandfather left it to me, my mom, and my aunt, and we all want to do something with it. And we were like, all right, we were in our training program. We had a lot of high-minded ideas, I think, about what education could be. Why are schools places that just be the love of education out of kids,
Right.
and what can we do to change? So we're decided we're going to try to make a school. We keep coming down. I spent all the last, I guess, so that was like 8 years ago. I've spent every summer in Alabama since, while working as a teacher in New York. And we started building this organization, the Sand Mountain Cooperative Education Center. Pretty quickly, we realized starting a school is a regulatory nightmare, and you need a lot more money than we had access to. So we started a summer camp in 2019, and we actually started in Gunnersville because his grandfather had also built a small cabin, where I am now. You can see the beautiful ceiling here. His grandfather picked out every single plank so you would have just the right knots in the
Nice.
ceiling. Yeah, it's a really beautiful little house, but we decided to start running the camp out of here because we're right here on the lake. It's just beautiful. So we've been running that summer camp since 2019. We teach the way we thought about the camp and what were the most useful things we could teach people. We thought about the question, what are the skills it takes to be free?
Mm.
Because we thought about what are some of the preconditions people need to be free. And one is, of course, material, which I think, the left mostly focuses on, and kind of the background we are coming from. And I think that's absolutely true. And And another one is, of course, kind of like mindset, and people talk about consciousness and whatnot. What we thought was really interesting, and part of this was supposed to be a match between what did people want in the area, what could we actually provide. It's kind of how we ended up here. That's the other reason we did the summer camp, is for like 3 years we are just surveying people, kind of, because we weren't exactly sure what we were doing. We were pretty young,
Right.
and
And
people were like,
you got to be in touch with the community.
exactly. Yeah. And yeah, and you have no chance if you aren't. So, people down here were telling us they wanted more childcare, and they wanted transportation. So that's how it actually became a summer camp was. What does a summer camp provide? Our camp is completely free. It's a day camp, but it's from 9 to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday for 3 weeks in the summer. And this year we ran 5 weeks. So we provide 3 meals a day. And we are picking up the kids. We have staff members driving our cars that we bring in from out of state, a rental car, and a couple like 90s Camrys that we have to go pick up the kids, because that's what people need. Transportation stuff around here. Shout out to the Automotive Free Clinic, of course, our mutual connection. But anyway, yeah, we started the camp. And I was talking about skills to be free. Yeah, the idea was that the ability to say do democracy, to run democratic institutions, is a skill set, right? You have
Right.
to be able to, right? Yeah, you have to be able to run meetings. You have to be able to build consensus, right? You have to be able to delegate tasks and follow up on them, right? There's a lot of organizational skills required. So that's basically what we teach the kids, and the kids help run the camp with us. Or not help. I mean, it's just we run it as a consensus model with the kids. So that includes off season. They are in meetings making decisions about budget, about timing, about recruitment, about staff personnel. They interview our staff, right? So all the major decisions they are an equal part of. And like I said, we use a consensus model. So that is teaching them the skill set required to create and run their own organizations, right? As they identify problems in the world that they want to solve, they're going to have the ability to organize people to address them. So that, and the camp's name is Lamplight. And again, it's in Gunnersville. But yeah, sorry, I've just been going out.
No, you're
You
great.
got
You're
to stop
great.
me.
Um, yeah, there was a lot there to unpack, and I really really like that framing of what do you need to be free, and what skills do you need to be free. And I think all of us who've tried to be an activist or an organizer or just an advocate of any kind in whatever setting, whether that's in the labor setting or elsewhere, you
Mhm,
run into people who do struggle with those skills, right? They maybe have a passion, maybe they have a burning
mhm,
issue, maybe
mhm,
they have expertise to share, but they don't necessarily know how to go about
yeah,
that. Like, how do you make some change? How do you uh,
mhm,
get your organization to do something? And what does that something look like? And so that's really, really fascinating to me that you've got young folks who are practicing those skills and learning those skills, because that is not something that they get much experience in the traditional education setting. And so I think that's really meeting a need. And I think it's interesting that you would be drawn to Alabama, uh, of all places. But I think it's important that this is happening in a place like Alabama, because uh, practicing democracy is not something that is really emphasized here. And
mhm,
it is more so in other cultures and in other areas.
mhm.
I've had friends from Vermont talk a lot about the town meetings in Vermont, and the just the culture of
Yeah, totally.
participating,
Yeah.
and mass participation, and being comfortable with that, and expecting that. And that is just really not how it is here. So
Mm.
all that to say, I think that's really fascinating. And I'll circle back to some of the other work that y'all are doing as well. But you know,
Yeah.
you you told me a little bit in terms of what interests you, but I wonder if you could expand on what is it about cooperatives and employee ownership that
Yeah.
really interested you?
Yeah, absolutely. And just because you mentioned it, the point about specifically being in Alabama, um, yeah, we're I mean really happy that we chose, I think, the right place to do it. And it's for a couple of reasons. We used to talk about, we were living in New York City at the time. There are so many organizers already, so many projects, so many people. I mean, half of them should probably just collapse into each other, right? Like, and it's not like that's not the case here. There's so many people doing incredible work here, and we're lucky to have met them. But there's that. The bigger factor here was just the presence of the state. I mean, we're in Marshall County out here. We're it's not Pickens, but we're pretty country out here, and we used to say, in New York City, there's no cracks. There's nowhere the state isn't. There's nowhere capital isn't. We were in a place where we had finally some space. And mind you just couldn't afford to do it, in New York. So those were some of the initial factors was we felt like Alabama presented an opportunity. That's not even the most important thing. The most important thing for us was we wanted to work uh, with rural working class kids, and we
Right,
do. And we had this idea that, like you said, there's not necessarily a ton of democracy style. I mean, people in New York would just call it progressive ed, and I don't think they would necessarily understand what we're doing. But there are schools that look kind of like that, and some of us had worked at some of them. And the question was kind of like, would this work with rural working class kids? And we're like, we know it's going to work. And it worked infinitely better, because when our kids down here, when they're in a meeting and they're trying to come to consensus, they're frankly, I don't know what it is, but they're just not needlessly creating conflict. Like, frankly, they're just the most reasonable kids I've worked with. I don't know if it's like a country thing. I'm from the Twin Cities originally in Minnesota, but it's just something I noticed, and
that's interesting.
yeah, it works really well. I just feel like they're problem solvers. You know what I mean?
Right.
So anyway, that's just something because I think if you kind of have, I don't know. I don't need to get too far off the deep end, but I think some of the kids in the city with liberal kind of uh wealthier parents tend to feel like more strongly about their kind of perspective and their individual uh needs being the most important. And
Right.
I think there's something a little more communal about some maybe the kids we work with down here.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Um Yeah, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Yeah, but anyway, I don't need to be just needlessly pontificating on folks here. But you asked about employee ownership. Um, yeah, man. I mean, to be honest, I came from a left, from a leftist organizing background, and we were very serious about the idea of workers owning the means of production, and we still are. I think when Marx identified that, I think he was really onto something. It's no secret to any of your listeners that you know say what you will about the political system and whether it's a democracy or not, or it just has democratic features. One thing we know is the economy isn't, right? I
Right.
mean, it's a dictatorship at work, and obviously all of your listeners are well aware of that. And of course, that's completely structures the material conditions that we all live in. And I think is certainly to me the defining feature of capitalism and its most oppressive relation. So employee ownership for us is the means to get to a democratic economy, both in terms of the power relation and also the results materially of what um, our mode of production produces. So yeah, I mean, I bring up the kind of some of these people we've met, like I said, like folks that work in you know, a factory that produces tractor parts, retiring with $6.5 million because they own the
Wow.
company. You know what I mean? That's just like a slice of what ownership can do, and that's happening right now. And that's the other reason we were hugely drawn to this, is because there are so many successful employee-owned companies, and the left doesn't know about them. There's people, the left tends to know about co-ops, and co-ops are amazing too. For me, the different forms of employee ownership are just tools in the toolbox, you know what I mean? It depends on the company. If you're going to go with a ESOP, which is an employee stock ownership plan, which is basically when you create a trust and then the trust buys the company and the workers own the trust. And the reason for the kind of, extra step is just that ESOPs pay like way fewer taxes, almost none compared to your average publicly or privately owned company.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's a quirk of the tax law. Fascinating history. It has everything to do with Huey Long Jr. Bizarrely, getting that one passed nationally. Um, but those that tends to be for slightly larger firms is a method of employee ownership, and whereas cooperatives tend to be smaller. We are interested in both. Our organization, the Sand Mountain Cooperative Education Center, is meant to expand and strengthen cooperatively and worker owned companies and institutions in Alabama. That's what we want to do. So we're working with a company now that might be interested in becoming a cooperative, based on the size and what the company is. It seems like that would be the better model. But hey, if it was bigger, we might try to make it an ESOP. But anyway, to get back to it, and I'll try to wrap up this point. Yeah, I mean, the main reason we decided to really shift our focus to employee ownership is because we basically we think it's a winning strategy. I think it can win. Like I feel like it's been long enough that I can probably say this. Ain't nobody coming for us. I remember when
Don't
Daniel
get
and I
yourself in
were
trouble
I'm
now.
like, the best part is I'm just gonna toss Daniel in anyway. Just because, man, those guys had you know uh, anyway, well, I'll just create some plausible deniability. I remember when Daniel and I were in the Black Bloc after a specific election, and we're in DC, and we're getting chased all over by the cops or whatever. They're the other folks participating are breaking shit, et cetera, et cetera. Daniel told me to put the break down, whatever. Anyway, the point is, we're just like, I had this kind of dawning realization, I think we both did, that like this wasn't working. It's not that we're against it. I think I'm probably always support on some level all these folks. Um, but it's just kind of not working. And then also, frankly, talking to one of our friends who is from Egypt, and we've spoke a lot about the revolution there, and how it turned out. And it just, that more than anything made it feel like the stakes were just way higher than I had thought of them as being before. And it kind
Right.
of made me re-examine a lot of history that I had thought one way about. And it kind of became clear to me that like some of the more insurrectionary politics were um more effective at starting civil war than at winning uh work in control of the means of production. And it's not that if something popped off, like I wouldn't know what side I'd be on, but what I found was that there's all these companies that are out competing their competition in employee ownership, and the workers own them. And it seems to me, and many of them are run democratically. Like, let's not get it twisted. A lot of them are just owned by the workers, and then the workers are able to elect, say, the board, or they have board membership. So then the board elects the management. So there's like representative democracy in a lot of these companies.
Right.
And then just a regular management structure. So they're not all democratic by any means, but if that's the workers decide they don't feel like dealing with much more than their job and voting for management every once in a while, they can still fire the management. You know what I mean? Like, that's still
Right.
meaningful. So that's most of them. But the point is, that's up to them, and that at their workplace, how they want to organize it. And there's a million ways to do it. The point is, these companies are already controlled by the workers. They are, on average, outcompeting their competition because the people at the company perform better. And mind you, there just ain't nothing wrong with that either. Doing good at your job, actually, most people want to. You know what I mean?
Right.
Unions talk about this all the time. And they do. When you own a piece of that sucker, like, you work, you're way more likely to get the best out of you, and people feel good about that too. Like, they, you know what I mean? Like, that's ownership also allows people to feel like ownership, responsibility, pride, right? Like, that's what most people want to feel. So I think that our idea is that we can reshape the economy in Alabama for now. That's where we work. That's where I live now, by the way, if that wasn't clear. I moved here a year ago to work on this full time. We think we can fundamentally transform and certainly not alone. We've meet a lot of people in employee ownership, a lot of folks on the left who want to meet more folks in labor. But we think we can transform the economy to a democratic and worker-owned mode of production through the success of the employee ownership model.
Right.
Out competing everyone else.
It's fascinating. It really is. And in terms of like just real material changes, there's a couple of things that I'm going to bring up here in a sec regarding labor and how this ties in. But before I get to that, I did want to see if you could kind of pick up on one of the other projects that y'all are working on, which is to start an Alabama Center for Employee Ownership. Yeah. So talk to us about that. Like, why is there a need for this? And I'm curious, like, because I know that there's different levels of state support across the country for employee ownership, for cooperatives. And of course, it varies from country to country as well. But why an Alabama Center for Employee Ownership?
Yeah. So, I mean, a huge part of that was we met with an organization called Employee Ownership Expansion Network, and they were super supportive. They were willing to give, if we could start, what they do is start these state centers. There's 21 of them right now. Alabama will be number 22, and they could give matching funds if we help to do this. And they have the same mission we do, which is just create more employee owners, right? And they typically do that through conversions. So one problem for employee ownership is just that not enough business owners know it exists. Like for example, I mentioned the ESOP. The thing that makes ESOPs amazing is that you can do just a fully leveraged buyout of the company, right? So you can essentially, employees can buy their company if you use an ESOP without putting any capital down.
Wow.
They just can use the profits of the business to pay off the loan that they used to originally buy the company. So like I said, you're looking for more like 50 employees to do an ESOP is kind of the number. Like, it has to be a little bit bigger of a company typically, but that's not a hard and fast rule either. So yeah, they basically what the center will do, the Alabama Center for Employee Ownership, is talk to a lot more business owners about, hey, look, the 70% of privately held businesses in this country are held by baby boomers. A lot of those folks don't have kids that are interested in taking over their business.
Right.
A lot of those folks don't want to sell to their competition because they don't like them, you know. Um, our pitch is you should sell to the people that you know and trust, that to keep those jobs and that money in your community, sell to your employees. So that's part of what we'll be doing. The other one that we want to do is talk to workers, because what if it's not just a good idea to sell to your workers? What if it's the expectation? What if every community understands that they have a right to keep these jobs and this wealth in their community, and actually are putting social pressure on the business owner to sell to their workers, right?
Right.
And then there's something there, and there may be something in there for unions as well, right? What if that expectation had a little bit of power and frankly financing behind it? What would that mean, right? So
Yeah, and I think maybe that's a good area for me to pick up with, in terms of labor.
mhm.
One of the ideas that Jacob and I both have been really interested in and have talked about on the show quite a bit was something that we heard from Jeremy Corbyn over in the UK with the Labour
Mhm.
Party, and it was the idea of right of first refusal, and the idea that in union contracts, um, it would be in the contract that if the company was to sell, the employees would have the right of first refusal. They would get first dibs to buy the company, right? And maybe it's in the ESOP model, or, however that looks.
Mhm.
But ensuring that the workers themselves have that opportunity. And you already touched on why that's important, right? Because, of course, the workers want to keep the jobs. The workers want to keep
Mhm.
the jobs in their own community, not outsource it to another country, right? Not outsource it to somewhere cheaper with, lower standards in this race to the bottom. It would be a way to maintain that wealth and production locally. So that is one area where I see this intersecting with labor. And, I'm definitely curious, about any other thoughts that you have on it. But it's something that I haven't heard the labor movement folks talk a lot about. And that was also part of the reason I wanted you on the show today is I think there ought to be more dialogue between folks who are working with cooperatives, working in employee ownership, and working in the labor movement, because ultimately, if the goal is to empower workers, right, these are different means
Yeah.
to empower workers.
Yeah.
And how can we collaborate? How can we kind of leverage our strengths together to be more successful? Because obviously, a cooperative business, an employee owned business, can be a unionized business.
Mhm.
And, I would just assume that an employee owned business would be less likely to engage in the vicious union busting that you see from an Amazon or a Starbucks. Not to say that, again, it depends on the specifics, like you said. Some are more democratic than others. Some,
Mhm.
are maybe more, um, some the workers have different levels of a voice, I'm sure.
Mhm.
But those are just some things that come to mind in terms of how it interacts with labor and how and why it's relevant. I'm
Mhm.
curious, you have any other thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right. I think that is a great way to kind of sketch out some of the playing field here with labor and employee ownership, because it's something that, like, I appreciate that you said that many employee owned firms are organized. They are. Um yeah, so you can have both. Um Yeah, I mean, I think right of first refusal is a great idea, and I think it highlights really what employee ownership from a labor perspective can bring to the table that unions can't by themselves, to be frank, which is, you know, you could fight the hardest campaign imaginable, and everybody already knows this, but you could fight the hardest campaign imaginable. You could win the vote, you could get the union, and then they close up shop. Speaking of Starbucks, like,
Right.
um, so
Or they drag their feet for a year, 2 years, 3 years before you get a
right.
first contract. They wait and hope that, there's so much turnover in that time that, when it's all said and done, the whole thing fizzles out. I mean, the laws are just so stacked against workers organizing, and there's always those limits to what is accomplished at the collective bargaining table.
Mhm.
There's management rights clauses. There are no strike
Mhm.
clauses. There are real concessions that are made. As fantastic as collective bargaining is compared to the mainstream alternative, which is no voice, no input, no security and stability. Uh, you know, the advantages are obvious, but there are real limitations to it. So, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the other interesting, like you said, the laws are so stacked um in favor of ownership. Um yeah, I mean, a couple of things. So one, right of first refusal and employee ownership more broadly allows workers to have control over whether or not the business is going to sell, it's going to go broke, it's going to move, right? um which is obviously a huge tool. The other one is that I don't this the state tends to like it more. It tends to be more favorable to employee ownership, unfortunately, than to labor. Um, I of course wish and have previously fought for it to be more friendly to both, but that's the
Right.
reality. The state knows that 70% of businesses are owned by baby boomers, and most places, unless you're in New York City or LA, are deeply concerned with this fact. I can tell you because we've met with them. The folks at the city of Birmingham are very worried about losing all their businesses. So they've been incredibly supportive, right? What happens when labor is negotiating the deal, they're winning. The business owner decides they're going to close up shop or move, and there's an option for the employees to buy it. Which side is the state on in that case? On that one, they're going to side with the employees because they don't want this business to leave town. You know what I mean? So there's ways to kind of play it, and it offers certain advantages. Which also, I mean, you can tell, like, now that I've been working on this stuff, I think my the way I theorize the state has really changed a lot as well. Um, anyway, yeah. So hopefully that, I mean, I could go on, but I'm curious about your thoughts so far.
Yeah, yeah. I think there's just a lot of opportunity, and I think it's something that labor needs to incorporate into our strategy.
Yeah.
You mentioned it earlier about tools in the toolbox, and for me, what are we using these tools for? It's to empower working class people. It's to shift
Mm-hmm.
the balance of power in our society that has gotten so far out of balance, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the domination by wealthy, powerful elites, and any way in which we can begin to shift that. And so I think labor has to incorporate this into our strategy and see where and when it makes sense to pursue. I think where we find employee owned companies and cooperatives, unions need to be at the table there to talk with those
Mm-hmm.
workers and listen to those workers, and
Mm-hmm.
and organize those workers. Um, and I think it's an opportunity to really grow it's a win-win opportunity, I think. And so it's something that I'm looking forward to more folks in the labor movement really, tackling this and incorporating it. That's why I was so excited when I heard, Jeremy Corbyn's Labor Party discussing it, because it wasn't
Hmm.
an idea that I'd ever really heard from a mainstream politician. Um,
Hmm.
and so we haven't seen a lot of conversations in the American labor movement that I'm aware of, but it's something that I really hope to see a lot more of, because we it does connect right now. You see the way in which UAW in their strike is fighting to preserve jobs. They're fighting to preserve
Hmm.
communities, right? That is
Hmm.
one of the things they're fighting over in this contract fight with the big three. Is the
Hmm.
right to strike over plant closures,
Yep.
assurances that their folks will be paid if a factory closes up shop and is to go overseas or wherever. Um, they're fighting to make sure that their members have work. Their members are paid,
Hmm.
to do
Hmm.
community work, so that that community is not left behind, because there are so many communities across this country that have been left behind. They were so dependent on one or two plants in town. And when they
Hmm.
shuttered doors, the whole town kind of fell apart. And there are communities like that all over this country. In employee ownership, I can see where employee ownership is a way to address that, and a way to address, this phenomena of outsourcing and this just broader race to the bottom. Um, so with that said, I'm curious, is there anything else that you wanted to add, whether it's about your projects or about, co-ops and worker ownership in general?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about that point that you made. That just again, thinking about employee ownership and labor. I mean, one, I really appreciated your episode on Powderly. That was outstanding, and I think that it's a great historical example of how those forces can team up to, like you said, empower workers. Ultimately, that's our goal too, and we just think this is a great means of doing it. This is the one that allows for direct power over the workplace, over the economy more broadly, as this gets organized into a movement and more firms are successful. And then also a means to generate wealth, which we know has the greatest generational effect on families, right? Um, if you can have a piece that you own that is generating wealth, you and your children can go far with that, right? I mean, it changes lives. I've seen it. So there's that. As far as, yeah, you mentioned a couple of you know, how exciting it was to see like Jeremy Corbyn talk about these ideas. I also have to like shout out Bernie because he's the reason there is a big pot of federal money to expand employee ownership that got written into the CHIPS Act, right?
That's
which
right.
which which Biden passed. So that is really exciting, and I remember seeing him on TV at the primary debates saying, every American company should have like 20% of the board should be workers. And I remember I remember standing up and be like, what? Like, this just was said on American television, like, so
Right,
that's
right.
amazing. And just thinking about the UAW, right? Like, uh, it's not just so employee ownership broadly is like kind of like if you transition a company to employee ownership, there's tends to be three transitions: financial, who owns the company; governance, what are the governing structures, who's going to be on the board; and then the day-to-day management operations, right? There's employee ownership models for all of these things. Some of the best at the management level were developed at Toyota. And there's a reason why Toyota is the most, it's not employee owned, but they use these kind of management structures. And that's the reason why, arguably, and I know Zach would love this, are the best manufacturer of cars in the world. You know what I mean? Is because of these management systems. And actually, when Ford was just nosediving, this was as Toyota was getting really strong, so it must have been like late 80s, early 90s. But they had a plant that was just like infamously uh uh you know like I don't even know, poorly run, I guess. And what they did was they had the workers, they had the Toyota guys come in to consult, and they actually flew like, I don't know, 200 workers to Japan to see the Toyota plants. And they came back. There's a great documentary about it because these workers were like, man, I just hated my job. I was drinking every day. Like it was frankly bad at this Ford plant. And then they instituted these Toyota um methods which were based on employee ownership, stuff like any worker could stop the entire line, right? And then a team would come in, consult with the worker on how to fix the underlying problem, and then they get it started. So the Ford system before was do not stop the line for anything, it costs us money. So they
Right.
never fix any of the underlying problems, right? So they come in and do it, and then they talk to these workers, and they're like, it became Ford's best plan in the country. And they talk to these workers, and they're like, man, dude, I stopped drinking. I started enjoying my job again because I had power over this. I was being listened to, you know what I mean? And it became this wildly productive plant. Like there's, I don't know, there's a whole history of like, of how not only say some of these plants in the United States where they're worried about losing their jobs could become employee owned and they could make generational wealth from it, but become better and more competitive as well. Which, when you're talking about employee ownership, when the firm is more competitive and better, it just means more money in the pocket of workers, you know? So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, there's a lot, there's a lot there.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said earlier, when you have some skin in the game, you are you're gonna get your best work in those scenarios, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Where you do have input, where you have some ownership, and
Mm-hmm.
it makes intuitive sense, right? And
Yeah.
we see it in the statistics that bear that out in terms of productivity. So, um,
Mm-hmm.
well, last thing, could you share any plugs like in terms of how folks can get plugged into your work
Yeah.
and find
Yeah.
out
Totally.
more about the
Yeah.
Lamplight Summer Camp or
Yeah. Yeah.
anything else y'all have going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So we will absolutely have applications open for the summer camp is kids 12 to 17, and then we started a program for our older ones, so 17, 18, 19 as well. But yeah, applications will absolutely be open in the spring, so that's lamplightsummer.com is for the summer camp, and then our website is coopeducation.org for SMCEC. There are contact links on there. And yeah, do not, if you're interested, if you want to learn more, do not hesitate to reach out. Yeah, the email for that one is info@coopeducation.org. There's a phone number on there. Um, and then the one for the summer camp is lamplightsummer@gmail.com. So feel free to reach out. And we got Facebook, Instagram as well, I believe. Definitely Facebook. And the summer camp has Instagram, but the kids run it. So it's like, frankly, way too many pictures of me with uh really stupid filters. So might not even be worth your time. But no, it's good though. It's funny. But yeah, those are things. Reach out if you are interested. We would love to talk to anybody. Oh, and we do have with Sand Mountain Cooperative Education Center, um we have an incubator. So workers, at a company who have an idea. First off, if you're a worker and you're interested in buying your company, with organizing your fellow workers and buying the company you work for, please reach out to us. We would love to talk. And if you are a worker with an idea to start a cooperative or employee owned company, also reach out to us. Yeah.
That is really good to know. I've got some ideas I'm going to send your way.
Sweet.
ideas that I've been cooking up over the years. They are probably just
Awesome.
wild ideas, but I'm going to send them your way
We
regardless,
love
and I
loud
encourage
ideas.
other folks to do the same.
Yeah.
So,
Heck
Kevin,
yeah.
thanks again for being on this morning. Do you have anything else before I let you go?
No, that's it. Yeah, those, if you have any of those style ideas, coopeducation.org, definitely reach out. And Adam, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast, man. I love it. So yeah, I really appreciate your time and getting the opportunity to be on here.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Kevin. Appreciate you.
Yeah, take it easy, man.
All right, y'all. So I definitely enjoyed that. Learned a little bit today about co-ops and employee ownership. Um, that's what it's all about, folks. Just trying to learn a little bit, see how we can empower working class folks. Really fascinated with the work that they're doing. The summer camp in particular really, interests me as a former educator. One of the things that I always regretted about my time in the classroom is I felt like I never really made a lot of progress in that realm of more democratic, collaborative style education, um, where the students themselves really have skin in the game and really have ownership and really are part of the process. And part of that was the school district I was teaching in was very top down, rigid, authoritarian in its management style. And so that really wasn't conducive. Um, but I always just felt like we do our young people a disservice by not teaching them and helping them learn these skills and how to participate democratically. And when I've had a chance to speak to young people about unions and do some school visits, one of the things that I emphasize is that unions are democratic organizations. They are run by the workers. The members elect their leaders. The members participate in meetings, which are run democratically. Um, and I really want to emphasize that to young folks to let them know that there are ways that you can have a voice. Because a lot of times folks think that they can't have a voice or they don't have a voice or they don't know how to use their voice. But you absolutely can and should um, because we're all in this together. We all sink or swim together. So really appreciate Kevin for his time this morning. I do hope you will check that out. Can't wait for a few years. My daughter will be old enough to go. She's not old enough yet, but when she is old enough to attend Lamplight, definitely looking forward to that. So I'm going to wrap up here this morning by sharing a few of the really cool events that Labor Notes has coming up. Of course, the big conference is in April. That is April 19th to 21st in Chicago. But they have some great meetings online that are coming up. The Stewards Workshop on November 15th is on assertive grievance handling. And this is ideally for stewards and elected officers, not for staffers, because it is a limited registration, limited capacity. But if you are working on grievances, if you do that in your day-to-day role with the union, this would be a great workshop to attend. Of course, as with every month, they will be having a workshop on what to do when your union breaks your heart. Next one's coming up on November 7th. And then October 23rd, this one looks really interesting. Fight the Boss, Fix the Climate. Really timely. It's an online workshop, and it's talking about the green economy and greener technology. And we are hearing a lot about these, and it's kind of a buzzword to go green. But what does it actually mean for workers? What does it mean for the folks working in these new jobs? What does it mean for workers in old jobs that are going to be phased out? So this should be an interesting workshop. And finally, of course, they are doing their Secrets of a Successful Organizer series on Wednesday evenings. The first one was last night, October 11th. But if you missed that, they still have the 18th and 25th. And if you can't attend this month, do attend that at some point. I encourage everyone who is interested in getting involved in the movement to take that class. It's really worth it. So, y'all, that's going to pretty much wrap it up for Shop Talk this morning. Do tune in on Saturday. We've got a really good episode planned. I will be back in the saddle Saturday. I've been out on the last 2 weekends. Looking forward to be back on the main show with Jacob, and I've got a lot that's been, grinding my gears over the past couple of weeks. So I've got plenty to say on the show Saturday, and I'm also really really looking forward to our guest panel. Um, I don't want to reveal it just yet, but it's going to be really great. Workers from some really great campaigns that have been successful just in the last couple months. So, looking forward to that. So, this is it for Shop Talk. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please share. I appreciate everyone who tunes in and everyone who likes and follows and subscribes. All that stuff really does matter, and it really is helpful, and we appreciate it. Encourage you to check out our website, tvlr.fm. Don't forget that you can subscribe to our newsletters. We put out Boss Watch and Last Week in Southern Labor as newsletters. Do sign up for those if you're interested. Our new t-shirts are in, so check out the store at tvlr.fm/store. And finally, we rely on donations and sponsorships to put out all of this free content. We really appreciate the local unions and organizations that have sponsored ads on our main Saturday show, as well as Labor Notes sponsoring Shop Talk. Please hit us up if you have ideas for sponsors or if you're interested in your organization or union becoming a sponsor. Our single biggest source of contributions comes from listener donations. You can make a one-time donation or a recurring contribution at tvlr.fm/donate. Whether you donate, share, subscribe, or just listen, we really appreciate your support and can't do it without you. So if you share our mission to grow the Southern labor movement, if you share our belief in the power of solidarity and collective organization, if you want media that is for working people, by working people, please consider becoming a recurring donor at tvlr.fm/donate. All power to the workers. Solidarity, y'all.